Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is about religion and coronavirus because of course for some religious wingnuts, prayer is the way out of it. Now, I don't mind going to church just occasionally myself. It's sort of a theatre for me. I've been into mosques many times, things like that, been into a few synagogues, been into loads of Buddhist temples, gurdwaras, that's where Sikhs worship, a mandir, I suppose you could call it, where Hindus worship. But anyway, if you want to pray, well, it might relieve your stress. So there might be some sort of psychosomatic benefit to doing that. But I think some people in the United States are being very irrational about coronavirus, thinking that that prayer, especially in big groups, rather than medicine and self-isolation, is the way to solve this, which is unutterably moronic. Now, President Trump said a couple of weeks ago, "We have done a job the likes of which the world has never seen." Yep, you can say that against Donald. Yeah, you have done a job the likes of which the world has never seen, but not in the way that you mean it. As in, you've done incredibly badly, having something like 20% of the world's coronavirus deaths when you've only got 5% of the world's population. You're all saying, MAGA, make America the greatest again, you're the greatest, the richest. Okay, you've got more wealth than any other country in the world, but therefore you've got the resources, the financial resources to deal with this better than anywhere else. But you haven't. You've dealt with it worse than many countries. Maybe not as bad as some countries, but it's still fairly bad. Worse than almost any other Western country. Republic of Ireland, we've dealt with it fairly badly. The UK's dealt with it very badly, I think I can fairly say. So just because I'm castigating the Trump administration doesn't mean that I'm saying the Irish government or the British government has done a brilliant job either. This is how irrational it's getting. Trump is cutting funding to the World Health Organization. Sorry, completely blocking it. Why? Because he thinks they've said some things about China which are too positive. Now, I mean, I presume the Chinese government are lying about the statistics. They're just not credible, as the Chinese government tells massive whoppers of lies about loads of things, like holding 1 million people in re-education camps to brainwash them, locking up 1 million people without trial, the Uyghurs, this racist policy of theirs. But when the United States was offered free equipment by the World Health Organization, Trump turned it down. So he's utterly moronic. He's the one to blame, not them. And I realize, the United States, the Chinese clearly didn't have sufficiently have hygiene standards in their wet markets, which is one of the reasons this has jumped the species barrier. So Bible Trumpers, this well-known group, very irritating set of people who will make an idol out of one of the world's most un-Christ-like people, about Donald Trump, who until 2016 never made any pretense to being remotely religious, didn't darken the doorstep of any church or meeting house. Now, nothing wrong with being non-religious, irreligious, anti-religious. I'm non-religious. It doesn't have to be a bad thing to be a religious person either. So my friends are real holy rollers. But what really sticks in the craw with me is making this very unconvincing attempt to seem religious, so ungodly. The notorious 2 Corinthians example, when anyone who knows anything about the Bible would say, no, it's 2 Corinthians, as in St. Paul's second epistle to the Corinthians. And yet, rightly are the faithful called simple, because these simpletons are willing to be fooled. Trump sees them as a mark. He's been a con man all his life. He's broken just about every commandment there is, calling himself the chosen one. So he's calling himself God. And as for murder, large-scale slaying of civilians in Iraq and Syria, and completely unapologetic about it as well, and saying that he would deliberately target civilians. If you would intentionally kill civilians, that is murder. Even in a declared war, if that is your aim, is to kill civilians, not you killing military personnel and inevitably a few civilians get killed as well. No. You would go out of your way to kill civilians. That is murder. There's no two ways about it. Even in a declared war, it's indubitably murder, which is what he boasted he would do when he was seeking the presidency. And yet these people who love Jesus, meek and mild, suffer the little children to come unto me, they voted for Trump. Well, so these are very irrational people. I know the snake handlers are a real minority of them, because somewhere in the Bible it says, if you pick up a serpent, yea, it shall not harm ye, or some twaddle like that. And so people really put that to the test in some parts of the United States, having snakes in boxes and kicking them around the church to get them riled up, get them really furious, and pick them up and take several of them. Of course, and they get bitten and sometimes killed doing it, and saying that's God's way, that's just God's way. What, have the snake bite you and then you die? Okay, but doesn't it prove that the Bible is nonsense, because it said that the serpent would not kill you, and it did? What did you expect? Anyway, so there are people like Jehovah's Witnesses. This is a very unusual Christian denomination, and they're against blood transfusions, for example. Now, I think they're absolute loonies, but an adult of sound mind, especially in a non-emergency situation, is entitled to refuse medical help, even if that leads to the person's death. But are they allowed to refuse it for their children? I don't know what the law in the United States is. In this country, they're not allowed to prevent their children having. I think that's right. The Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, who were outlawed in Russia in 2017. So they were fine for years. All of a sudden, they became an extremist group, according to Putin. I mean, I suppose they are an extremist group. I don't think they should be banned. But, Putin, like Adolf Hitler, has outlawed the Jehovah's Witnesses. You don't like the comparison, Putinites? Well, it's damn true. You can't argue with that. It's absolutely factual that Nazi Germany under Mr. Hitler banned the Jehovah's Witnesses, sent them to concentration camps, and Putin also has them sent to prison for subscribing to a faith that he doesn't approve of. Wow. Obviously, Putin is the real extremist, saying that he could kill anyone in the world, has the legal right to kill anyone in the world. Russian parliament passed that law in 2016, who is an extremist, right? Putin said that. Anybody in any country in the world who is an extremist, according to him, can be killed by his forces legally. You didn't commit a crime, didn't get charged with the crime, no trial, you didn't try to do anything violent, you're just an extremist. With no definition of what if he dislikes you, you're an extremist, he can kill you. He's the extremist. How extreme is that belief of his? But anyway, the sort of person that Trump thinks is wonderful. Christian scientists saying, if you're ill, don't seek medical help, pray. I know a doctor who was a fairly religious one. He said, seek medical help and pray. Why do you have to do one and not the other? You can do both. That's fine. That doesn't diminish your faith. Maybe God is working through the doctor's hands, guiding the scalpel of the surgeon, or the Holy Spirit is inspiring the nurse to do the right thing, or even the pharmacist, of making the equipment work. It reminds me of this old gag. So there's an inundation comes along, and a holy man is stuck in his house. The flood comes, and so a rescue boat comes on and says, come on, get in the boat, we're going to rescue. He says, no, the Lord will save me, no need, go away. And the boat goes away. A few minutes later, the water's even higher. The man's gone up to the first floor of his house, and a rescue boat comes along and says to the holy man, come on, get in the boat, we'll rescue. And he says, no need, I prayed to the Almighty, and he shall save me. And then an hour later, the man's on the roof of his house because the flood waters have risen so high. And a helicopter says, come on, get a hold of the rope, as they lower it down. We're going to rescue. He says, no need. I know the Lord shall save me, for I have prayed unto him. The helicopter goes away. Anyway, the guy drowns eventually. He goes up to heaven and he says to the Almighty, Lord, why didn't you save me when I prayed to you? And God says, well, I sent 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want? And so it is with these religious people and coronavirus. Could it not be that God is working through these government officials who say, self-isolate, stay at home, wear a mask, things like that. Seek medical help when you can. I mean, there were saints who were doctors. Thomas, doubting Thomas, oh ye of little faith. So he was a doctor. But so maybe people believe in mind over matter. Maybe that helps them, their faith. The United States got 17 million jobless. Well done, Donald. And you made low unemployment a litmus test of your presidency. Now, admittedly, the spike in joblessness is mainly due to coronavirus. But every other country's had such a problem with coronavirus, and I don't think any other country's seen such a sharp rise in unemployment. So he's mishandled that one as well. And the thing is, it can be fast in, fast out. If you have a swift lockdown, a total lockdown, you can get out of it quite soon and start growing, as the Chinese are doing. South Korea with their testing, Iceland with their testing, and life could continue largely as normal. Sweden. So countries have proved where their ways to handle this much, much better. Singapore likewise. So, I mean, as for these Christian fundamentalists who support Trump, if you really think that your patter to God is going to do the trick, you don't need to take action like self-isolating or taking medicine. All right, then. Why don't you apply that to other things? Don't vote for Trump, just pray for him. that he'll miraculously win the election. Wonder why you're not going to do that one, because this is something you really worry about, so you won't actually vote. If you want to defeat ISIS, no, don't send any troops. Just pray that they will lose, and then God will zap them or something. If you want to forbid abortion, don't have legislation passed. No. Or even trying to protest at the clinic. Pray that people will stop, and that should do the trick. Oh, but you don't believe that. You actually take positive action. So why not apply this by taking rational action towards achieving your objective in the case of coronavirus? Or, don't pray, pray to fund the army. Don't actually vote through policies which give more funding to the army. Or indeed, just don't work, don't have a job. Just pray that the Lord shall provide you with money and food and everything else. So, and Trump is handling this in a very illogical way, using his press conference not to inform the public or help them out, but to boast about what a wonderful job he's doing, because he's such a bombastic fellow, and pouring scorn on the media for asking him reasonable questions, for doing their job, being the eyes and ears in the public, scrutinizing the executive, holding him to account. If there's a question that he doesn't like, if it's not a complete p-roller, he'll say, that's a nasty question. I mean, wow, what a brat, what a toddler. What a wimp. He's such a wuss. Throwing his toys out of the pram, throwing a tantrum when somebody asks him a reasonable question, responding with ad hominem, saying it's fake news, when he's the one spewing out fake news. Donald Trump's statements are as fake as his tan, and yet the fake tan Führer has a huge following amongst the American public. But I noticed there was an uptick in his approval rating the first 3 weeks of this, because rally to the president, he needs our support, sink our differences. Now's not the time to quarrel. It usually happens, but like George W. Bush's ratings shot up to almost 90%. Donald Trump's didn't actually quite touch 50%, but now they're falling. It's going on longer. He's mishandling it. He's going against the expert advice. It's getting worse. It's spreading into the red states. Now, I know some states with a very diffuse population, like Alaska and Wyoming, it's not going to affect them too badly. A lot of people live on farms, these very remote communities, where the population is more densely populated. In California, New York is affecting them very badly. But as someone said, it's about how dense the population is and how dense the population is, as in be smart, okay? Don't gather in huge groups, and going to a packed church is precisely the worst thing to do, especially if you're there for an hour, and if you're singing lustily, as in people are going to be exhaling so much, and then obviously inhaling each other's germs or mucus or whatever it is. What is it in the particles in the breath that transmit COVID-19? So Trump's words are as fake as his blonde hair. And how macho is that? All these alpha male types. He's a real manly man who dyes his hair orange at the age of 76 or something. His hair is blonder or oranger or whatever color it's supposed to be than it was when he was in his 20s. Phoning in Jeanine Pirro on one of her shows, I noticed she's wearing a huge cross. Wow, what a Pharisee. So I think Donald Trump, we've been spared that one at least, that he hasn't worn the big cross. No one knows more about the Bible than me, Donald Trump said in 2016. Christians are supposed to be humble. Where's the self-effacement? Not constantly bragging and boasting about his ratings in these shows. Well, you are the president. It's not because they like you or particularly trust you. There might be some useful information about this is what you do to avoid COVID-19, wearing scarves over your face. He didn't know it's scarves. Donald, you might have learned in first grade that those words that end in F, those nouns that end in F, when they're pluralized, the F turns to a V. Like wolf becomes wolves, knife becomes knives, life becomes lives, wife becomes wives. You're on your third wife at the moment, you might have noticed. So, obviously the guy has failed at the rudiments of English. So he doesn't even essay to engage with the substance of the question when a journalist asks him a decent question. So a journalist worth his salt would put the president on the spot about his manifold failings, about the 600,000 cases of coronavirus, about his repeated failure to acquire more equipment, to distribute ventilators and so on the basis of the need, to use the US military for logistics, and he's still dithering about the lockdown. Now, there are two ways you could do this. You could have said, the economy matters, screw coronavirus and carry on as normal. Or you could have said, no, coronavirus actually really matters, health, and have a lockdown. and deal with that and then get the economy back to normal. And what he's done is he's fallen between two stools. It's sort of the worst of both worlds. But obviously completely ignoring coronavirus, I think would be bad for the economy too, because, how many people would have died if the United States had carried on completely as normal? The US government is thinking 100,000 deaths would be a good result. Surely it'd be in the millions, several million deaths. And when you can't buy things when you're dead, so much for a consumer economy, you can't work when you're dead. So, yeah, I mean, the most basic requirement for someone to make an economic contribution is they have to be alive. There's some countries like Pakistan, which has got a tiny number of coronavirus cases in proportion to their population, like 1,000. Now, even if they're lying, even if their healthcare system is fairly shoddy, they can't be lying by that much. Even if it's 10,000 out of 200 million people, that's trifling. Even if it's 100,000, that's not that much their population. They link to China. They got that economic corridor to China. I'd be minded to open up if I were them. And India. And I have faith in the Indian healthcare system. I've seen it from the inside, just a little bit. So anti-intellectualism and disdain for science, these are two twin pillars of the Christian fundamentalist movement in the United States. And it's a substantial movement. Something like 60% of Americans call themselves Christians. Perhaps half of those are fundamentalists. And the fundamentalists are overwhelming Republican voters, mainly because abortion, that is a really Christian issue they can be on. But everything else, you can be a Christian fundamentalist and care about the environment. In fact, that would make more sense. You've got dominion over the world as we're stewards of the creation. We're supposed to protect it. You could be a Christian fundamentalist and want high taxes, want more regulation, want social justice, want higher wages, or redistribution of wealth, want gun control, want an end to wars of aggression, and on, want be against the death penalty. But for some reason, because of the abortion issue, that leads to them usually being Republican on everything else. So, yeah. And obviously disbelieving in evolution and things like that, or hard evidence data which proves that lax gun laws lead to more gun deaths. So that's what faith will get you. Mistaking credulity for virtue, or going through certain rituals, these propitiations then count as goodness rather than actual goodness of honesty or helping people or reducing suffering. So that's what faith is about, believing without evidence, or even better, in the face of the evidence. That's particularly highly praised. So much for reason. So this anti-enlightenment movement has a worryingly strong grip over a large proportion of the United States' population. So we should be more rational, believe in things because they prove them to be true. Use a Socratic method, come up with a hypothesis, invent an experiment, observe it, draw conclusions from that experiment, and apply this to, say, coronavirus. Analyze both success and failure. That's what you need to do in business. But Donald doesn't know that, which is why it's failed so much. Which countries have handled this really well? Why? How? Can we replicate that here? Iceland's success presumably couldn't be transplanted to the United States because they've got 300,000 people and a huge area in proportion to their population, so that probably wouldn't work. And they've got publicly funded healthcare, and they tested and traced. But then you see Singapore with a very dense population, they did make it work. But that's because they've got superb healthcare, very distant population, and the government is very rational and just acts quickly and decisively. And power is diffuse, is localized in the United States, which in some ways is a good thing. But and that's another irrational thing Trump has said, that he takes no responsibility for this. And he's not ordering a federal lockdown, but yet he claims the authority to end the lockdown state by state. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either you do have the authority to impose a lockdown, or you don't. And if you don't, then you don't have the authority to lift a lockdown. Moron. I mean, he's just contradicted himself again. But enough of his chumps will fall for him on this one. So it is federal because you ordered a federal state of emergency. And therefore it is your responsibility. If you have total authority, you have total responsibility. And if you have no responsibility for the situation, then you have no authority. So make your mind up. He's always trying to have it both ways. So this disbelief in data leads to intuiting what to do. Yeah, going with your gut instinct. Well, that's reassuring. And what a size of a gut he has. You see how reckless he is. He had unsafe sex with Stormy Daniels, knowing that she was a pornographic actress. Well, also glamorize a prostitute. Nothing wrong with being a prostitute. So he could have caught AIDS from her and given it to his wife. Family values, hey? So Trump seems to be effectively illiterate. I mean, he can't read at an adult level, how he's screwed up reading things from teleprompters again and again, and far too idle to do his homework. He was too lackadaisical to learn how to pronounce various Indian names before he read them out in India, and made a complete fool of himself, just humiliating his country yet again. And I've noticed how he just makes up numbers all the time about unemployment under Obama, when it was 5%. Oh, it's 10% or 15% or 20% or 30%. Some people say 42%. Who says that? Just inventing absolute bullshit. And it's infuriating. You think people would be disgusted and say, this guy's not remotely credible. We can't touch him. He just invents lies all the time, just so flagrantly. So he can smell the right decision to take, like Benito Mussolini. I wonder if Trump knows who Benito Amilcare Mussolini is. I very much doubt it. So he's constantly spouting this drivel. Trust your instinct, hey? And now anti-vaxxers are curiously silent, which is a refreshing change, because a vaccine is one of our hopes here, and obviously there are quite a few anti-vaxxers in the Trump movement. So why do they say, oh no, President, we can't have a vaccine? And that's obviously just how irrational these people are, what doublethink there is. If they think vaccines are so terrible, surely they should swear off Trump. He should be anathematized for promoting a vaccine. And then Trump's come out with this pseudoscience about how to cure the disease. And some people have followed his advice, foolishly placing their trust in their president, and died as a result. So, oh my God, it's just so infuriating and so dispiriting that such an absolute malevolent arsehole, an idiot, is there in the White House with his finger on the nuclear button, with the power to annihilate our own species, well, the whole planet. So, he banned flights from China early on. That was a good thing to do. And if reopening the economy was so important, why do you do it already? He could have banned all flights, even internal ones, because all airports are under federal authority. People wouldn't move between states. That would help. So, but if you do it quickly and properly, then you can be out of it sooner. A stitch in time saves nine, sort of thing. And because they're still dithering, all this foostering about policy is not helping. Different states having different policies, states which are adjacent to each other. In Florida, doing it on a county-by-county basis, or making places of worship uniquely exempt from laws against gatherings. And some, states, they've had to take numbers of who's attending church and send them warnings and tell them to self-isolate. I know it's distasteful, but otherwise the disease is going to spread. I don't care whether it's a church or a shopping centre or a school. You can catch it in any of these places. The church is not immune from the disease. You think the disease knows it's a church or cares it's the church? If it did, would stop? Of course it wouldn't. How stupid can you be? And churches ought to lead by example, say, we're not going to do this because we care about parishioners. You can pray at home. Nobody said you can't pray. You can pray at home. You can pray in the garden. You can pray in a park, something like that, just not in a huge group. Anyway, so if the lockdown is so horrific, Donald, end it now. End it already if that's what you think, so he doesn't have the courage of his own convictions. And constantly indecisive, a flip-flopper. That's how Republicans used to castigate John Kerry. So if this lockdown had been introduced expeditiously, it could have ended, well, about now. They started in February or something, it would have been much better. So the Republic of Ireland were foolish enough not to stop people going to the Cheltenham Festival, the Gold Cup, that horse race. UK was foolish enough to let it go ahead. It would have made it much worse. So Trump ought to base his decisions on what his doctors say, not disregard them, not belittle them, and tell the public to go against their advice. Is it imbecility or is it malevolence? Surely it's both.